session. In terms of framing this, Nebraska has their framework for school renewal, and this session is really going to focus on the first core action. So making sure that we anchor instruction on high quality instructional materials, content, but that we're really pushing forward with the appropriate supports and interventions that are going to give kids access to grade level material. So we are going to take you back to 2018 when TNTP published the Opportunity Myth, which is their 6th national report. We came to this national report like we've come to many of our others, and that is through our work on the ground. So over the past couple of years, we have been helping our clients make that transition from their more rigorous state standards. And while people were reporting that they were working hard to make these shifts, our reviews of over 2,700 classrooms around the country, we found that in 2 out of 3 classrooms, the assignments were not rigorous enough to prepare students for college. And then 3 in 4 teachers weren't even changing the way that they teach to meet these new academic standards. And so we began to wonder how students were experiencing this gap. So we asked them. And we designed a research study that allowed us to study 5 different districts, 3 urban, 1 rural, and then 1 charter management organization or a CMO. And we followed around 4,000 students and their teachers in the 2016-2017 school year. And so we had a ton of data to paint a picture of how students were experiencing this. And in each district, we were able to do a K-12 partnership. So we got the full gamut of how kids work, of all the different kinds of kids that we could find who would talk to us. And in those classes, we gathered around 5,000 student assignments and then 20,000 pieces of work on those assignments to measure the quality of the assignments kids received. We conducted a bunch of classroom observations, over 1,000 hours. And then we studied student engagement by conducting 30,000 student surveys. And finally, we collected a teacher survey from every teacher in our study to measure teachers' expectations for their students. And so a lot of different work went into that. And what did we find in the results here? We found that students have really clear goals and are generally doing what they're asked to do in school. So in spite of the fact that kids are being asked what they're doing what they're being asked to do, they are not ready to succeed after school because they spend most of their time in school without access to grade appropriate assignments, without access to strong instruction, without deep engagement, and without teachers with high expectations. And this is true for all students, but it's particularly true for students of color and students from low income backgrounds. They're even more likely to get those resources. They're even less likely to get those resources than their white and more affluent peers. And finally, we saw that when kids do have access to all 4 of those resources, which are strong instruction, grade appropriate assignments, deep engagement, and teachers with high expectations. So when they have access to those 4 resources, then we see improvements in student achievement, especially for students who started the year performing below grade level. So for example, students who started the year significantly below grade level, they made 6.1 more months of academic progress than when they received access to stronger instruction. 6.1 more months. We also saw evidence that we have been dishonest with students about how well prepared they are to reach those big, clear plans I told you about. When we considered the almost 25,000 pieces of student work that we collected, we graded the work twice. The first time we graded it, we asked ourselves if the students met the demands of the assignment. So did they meet the demand? Did they get an 80 or above on the assignment? And 71% of the time, they did. Then we graded it a second time. And on the exact same assignment, we asked ourselves if students met the demands of the standards, the grade level standards, with 80% accuracy on the same assignment. And we were only able to say yes 17% of the time. That 54 percentage point gap is full of assignments that don't give kids a chance to meet the full demands of the standard. So we're basically telling kids they're earning A's and B's, and we're not really preparing them for the college level work. 54 percentage point gap. But there's hope, because when we did give kids the chance to work on grade appropriate content, we saw that kids were successful across demographic groups. Students of color, students from low income backgrounds, students with IEPs, students who are learning English. In all of those groups, students can and do meet the bar when we give them the chance. In spite of the fact that kids are often getting low quality assignments, when we just look at the assignments that give kids a chance to meet the demands of the standards, we saw that all kids can be successful on grade level assignments when we give them a chance to work on them. We also saw that many students never got a chance to try grade level assignments. Never. We collected assignments for 3 weeks during the 16-17 school year. And in 4 out of 10 classrooms in our study, serving a majority of students of color, never once experienced a grade level assignment in those 3 weeks. 4 out of 10 classrooms. That was true for only 1 in 10 classrooms that served a majority of white students. So in our study that served classrooms of a majority of students of color, 4 out of 10 classrooms never experienced on grade level assignments, but majority white students, only 1 in 10 did that happen to. That means that students of color saw assignments much less often than our white students did. So how does that relate to what we're going to talk about, what we've been talking about with acceleration? We have a lot of learning loss. We know that. We're up against a big hill to climb. And in the past, we've historically tried to address learning loss in 3 ways: retention, social promotion, and remediation. And what we've been trying to hit home with you guys for the last couple of weeks, right, is that we have to think of acceleration, not remediation. We have to push kids and give them the supports to access grade level material, not just remediate and continue to give them, reteach the content from the previous grades, or they're not going to catch up. Okay. So, having access to stronger instruction has made a difference for students, particularly those who are further behind. We saw that, right? 6.1 months of growth. And the schools and classrooms that provided students with the strongest instruction tended to have a few traits in common that can be instructive for us as we begin to think about what it takes to improve the student experience at scale and close those gaps and think about how we close the gaps in unfinished learning and teaching that students are going to have from this last year. So first off, these classrooms and schools tended to have a clear vision of what excellent instruction was supposed to look like. The school leaders could name concrete sets of instructional expectations, and the teachers in those schools could name the same expectations. So there was that alignment. And today, that's what we're going to focus on. We're going to give you those clear, concrete sets of expectations so that you can turnkey those to your teachers. Second, this vision of excellent instruction tended to focus on putting high quality content in front of every student and expecting students to do most of the work and thinking in the class. The tool that we're going to show you today is going to show you how you can do that. Third, the schools consistently maintained their focus on what mattered instructionally. They weren't changing priorities or initiatives or constantly adding new ones. They made sure that their focus, their development offerings, and their support for teachers were consistently aligned to their vision for instruction. That's something that you're going to really need to think about this summer as you're planning your PD, you're planning your scopes and sequence. And finally, and this is really important, these schools provided lots of support to teachers to be able to achieve the school's vision of instruction. For instance, administrators were frequently in classrooms to provide low stakes, non-evaluative feedback and coaching to teachers. The tool that we're going to give you today can be used to do just that. So you'll be able to take what you're learning today and really implement these 4 key practices so that you can achieve the kind of growth that you're going to need to achieve going into next year. All right. So, as I told you earlier, we're going to hone in on whether or not your students have access to strong instruction in ELA. And we are going to dig into that today. What are the hallmarks of excellent instruction? Today, we're going to focus on ELA. Next, the biggest thing that you need to focus on is put grade level content in front of students. The next thing you need to do is make sure that you're asking students to do worthwhile, standard-aligned tasks with that content. And the final thing is ensure students do the work and the thinking. And again, the tool that we're going to have you use today is going to help you do all of that. So, what does this look like in a literacy classroom? All right, Shireen, do we have the tool to drop to them? Great. So, in the handout that I believe Elizabeth or Shireen just dropped to you in the chat, you are going to find a copy of the ELA instructional walkthrough tool that we used in the opportunity myth to determine whether students had access to the effective instruction in literacy to effective instruction in literacy classrooms. And today we're going to orient you to this tool and talk about the high-level indicators of effective literacy instruction. We're not going to go through every indicator in detail. The purpose of this session is not to norm you on using this tool, but to give you a general sense of what strong literacy instruction looks like so that you can develop your own vision of excellent instruction and improve your classroom practice or support others to help you realize your vision of strong instruction. If after today's session, you're interested in going deeper, you can follow up with us. We have our contact information at the end, and we have much more extensive training for anyone who wants to more deeply understand the key indicators of effective literacy instruction. So what I want you to do now is take 5 minutes to read and annotate the literacy observation tool. Just jot down any questions you might have about the tool itself. And I'm going to have you either jot those down or write down anything that stands out to you so that you can jot it down in the chat. So I'm going to put 5 minutes on the clock. Okay, about 1 more minute. While you are, if you're finishing up, go ahead and put in the chat either any questions you have or anything that really stood out to you. All right. Okay, so that has been our 5 minutes. I already see people starting to respond here. Love that we are seeing some great responses. Yes, students are spending the majority of time reading, writing, and speaking about text. Joy of learning. That has been difficult for you. Yes, I think that has been difficult this year. Students are responsible for their own thinking. Yes, Diane, great comment. Yeah, so I think you guys are hitting the nail on the head, right? The students are the ones who are doing the majority of the talking and thinking about texts. And that in itself, just the fact that they are spending the time with texts, the majority of time with texts, and that they are the ones doing most of the thinking is a key factor here. Another thing to note is that the tool is structured hierarchically so that the more foundational elements generally come first. So first you check that kids are doing what they're being asked. Then you check that what is being asked of them is appropriate. So is the content or text grade level appropriate? And are the tasks appropriately challenging and standards aligned? And then finally, are students doing most of the thinking? So there is a hierarchical focus there. Okay, let's dig into the tool a little bit. As I noticed first, before we can even jump into literacy, right, we need to start first by looking at whether there is a culture of learning in the room, by which we mean, are students doing what is being asked of them? We look at this first because if kids are not generally on task and focused on the work of the lesson, then you may need to address classroom culture before or while also addressing the quality of content or thinking that's happening in the classroom. When looking at the culture of learning, we're also looking for indicators that students are doing what's asked of them in class. So we're looking to see that students are following behavioral expectations, completing instructional tasks, and just generally focused on the work of the lesson. And it's worth just noting that in our research, most classrooms were generally on task and doing what's asked of them. The bigger problem was that often kids were being asked, what was being asked of kids was not worthwhile. And so that's what we're gonna kind of get into next. So now we get to talk about literacy, which is my favorite. So I think a common myth when states started this process of shifting their standards is that elementary school teachers should no longer spend time on foundational skills instruction, and that's not the case. In fact, reading foundations in all states have their own strand in the standards, and that's especially true in Nebraska. The real change here is that rather than only emphasizing reading foundations, the skills should also be positioned as a means for comprehending rich texts, and that the direct skills instruction in these areas need to be embedded into a richer literacy experience that also focuses on the other strands of reading, writing, speaking, and listening, and language generally. So reading comprehension requires students to both decode and make sense of the words, right? You can't make sense of the words if you haven't read them first. And so you have to be able to do both. So they need to develop the skills-based competencies, including decoding and fluency, in order to read the words on the page. And students need to develop meaning-based competencies, including knowledge of the world, and associated vocabulary, in order to truly make sense of what they're reading. So why is this distinction meaningful? Skills-based competencies provide a solid foundation for students in reading. Decoding strategies should be flexible and grow as readers grow. In middle and upper elementary grades, the strategies include decoding multisyllabic words through dividing words into syllables and through the identification of base words and word roots and prefixes and suffixes. So efficient decoding skills are essential, but not sufficient for proficient reading. And as developing readers systematically process print through sequential decoding, they start to develop their ability to rapidly recognize common groups of letters and whole words as they build their fluency skills. And this is called orthographic mapping. And so once fluency is established, a maturing reader can begin to focus their attention away from that decoding and on actively constructing and responding to the meaning of print. The meaning-based competencies require sustained instruction and development from infancy through adulthood, right? So for many children, especially those from vulnerable populations, knowledge-based competencies are more likely to be the source of academic difficulties. And we hold off on, when children come to school age, if we hold off on focusing on those knowledge-based competencies and developing that language and language comprehension and the knowledge and vocabulary until students can decode, fluently by the end of second grade, we've wasted so much time. So that's why we need to focus on both decoding and sense making, starting at the earliest ages, but especially when kids come in kindergarten. So let's first dig into foundational skills. So in K-5 classrooms, you are probably going to use this next section on the reading foundational skills. You may encounter lessons that are focused on teaching the foundational skills of reading, such as concepts of print, phonics, phonemic awareness. And in these instances, and only these instances, you're going to use this section of the rubric. In many lessons that are focused on reading comprehension, you would just skip this. Now, in your K-5 and in your early literacy, your K-2 classrooms, you still will and should see a focus on reading comprehension, in which you would still skip this domain, right? But if you are focused on a foundational skills lesson, these are the things that you're going to look for. So let's talk a little bit about the, if you go to the next slide, the standards outline for the progression of skills development, just so that you have, obviously you need to use the standards as your guide, right? So you need to open up your Nebraska standards and use them as a guide for specifically, whether the lesson is grade level aligned. But if you want a general overview of the progression of skills development, most the four kind of strands are it's gonna start with print concepts. So this is like, English is read from left to right, top to bottom, page by page. Spoken words are represented in language by a specific sequence of letters. So these are things that you actually have to teach kids. If you're from high school, you may not realize that we actually have to teach kids this, but we do. And we do that with things like big books and everything, or you do it naturally, right, if you're a parent, by doing lap reading, and you just naturally show that to your kiddos. Next is phonological awareness, and this is the awareness of an ability to manipulate the sound units of spoken language. So phonological awareness is only sounds. It's not connecting the sounds to the letters. That is where phonics comes in, which is the next stage. And that's a concept that each letter or combination of letters represents a specific sound, and then also how to blend those individual sounds of letters to make words. Word recognition is the ability to recognize and read high frequency words, many of which cannot be decoded by regular spelling patterns. And then finally, fluency is the ability to read with speed, accuracy, and proper expression. And so one thing I just want to point out to just give you like an indicator of grade level, right? Kindergarten, you're going to be, by the end of kindergarten, they should be comfortable recognizing letters, writing letters, all the letters of the alphabet, and then knowing the primary sound symbol relationships, which means that they should be able to read emergent reader texts. So those simple texts with CVC words and a few sight words built in, they should be able to decode those texts by the end of kindergarten. By the end of first grade, students should have sufficient working knowledge of most of the English spelling patterns. So they should be able to decode regular 1 and 2 syllable words and, right, apply that to the spelling patterns and writing. And so by the end of first grade, they should be reading on grade level, and then being able to read grade level text with purpose and understanding. By the time they leave second grade, they should be decoding pretty automatically at this point and reading with fluency. And so by the end of second grade, they should be pretty independent with their reading, and be pretty much focused on comprehension at that point. Although fully independent reading comprehension isn't required until the end of third grade. So those are your kind of benchmarks if you were to benchmark the different grade levels here. I'm going to pause here. What questions do you have about the skills progression or benchmarking the first couple of grades of school for kids? All right, let's get into the fun stuff. So you'll see on the foundational skills indicator that you're going to want to see two things, and I want to make sure you understand the nuance between indicator B and indicator C. There should be an opportunity to practice, which is what you see on the left side, and the opportunities of practice can be without context, right? So the foundational skills instruction needs to be explicit. It needs to include teacher modeling and student practice. And that practice opportunity can be taught, that practice opportunity can be without context, right? Flashcards, tracing and writing the letters, right? That's completely appropriate. Kids need to practice that kind of in that way. On the right side, they also need connection to authentic reading opportunities. After kids practice the sh sound and the ch sound, they need to go into a decodable reader and practice this with decodable text. So they're not just looking at it on these flashcards and reading chick and chess and I don't even know what those rest of those words are. Chin, right? Now they're reading a story about a chimp named Charlie. That's probably too long of a word, but you know, a chimp named Chip, right? And then that is the decodable text that they're reading, practicing those phonic skills that they have already learned. Decodable text simply means it's decodable if students have already learned the phonic skills that are in the text. That's what makes it decodable. And then they may be writing about the text that they just read about, right? And writing in kinder and first grade is going to be a combination of drawing and sentence writing. Diane, it looks like you have a question.
Yeah, Kaylin, can you talk about the role of the nuanced role of comprehension in this area of the foundational skills? I think it's sort of, there's actually a question in the chat about that.
Yeah. So yes, so when you're reading like this decodable text, right, there is this, this response that you might do in response to that text that's going to be connected. In addition to this practice that's connected to the foundational skills. In addition, it's going to be really important, and I said this before, you don't want to only build foundational skills in these K2 classrooms. You have to also be building language comprehension, building knowledge, building vocabulary. And the way to do that is going to be through read alouds. Your read aloud texts are going to be at a lexile level or a grade level that is much higher than what kids can read on their own, right? It can be at a second or third grade level. If you're in kindergarten or first grade, those texts can be at a second or third grade level that you're reading aloud to kids. You're asking them those questions. You're getting them, you're working on that comprehension so that when they can independently decode at a much higher level, those language, knowledge, and vocabulary skills meet at that apex. Is that what you meant, Abby?
I think so. I think that sort of addresses the question in the chat. And I think also when I was just thinking about in terms of decoding, because that's when the question came in, you know, the emphasis of decodables is decoding, but there's still an element of sense making of the text. And that's sort of why you want to ensure that you're using higher quality decodables. You know, there are some decodables that are really just not high quality. So the higher quality ones, you're able to embed that comprehension. And, you know, especially kindergartners, some of those decodables are really funny to a 5-year-old. And in order to be funny, you have to be able to understand it. So as you're decoding, you're making sense of what you're reading too. So it is embedded within that. It's not purely for decoding and phonics.
Yeah, and I think it's always good to have some sort of response to reading activity after the decodable is done, so that students always see that connection of, oh, I finished reading, now you're going to ask me questions about it. And that question should include some sort of written response too. And that's something that students can do independently, which is good because then you can have that put in a center or something like that. Any other questions about foundational skills and the kind of practice? And again, this isn't like a huge overview, but if you want a huge overview, just a little plug, there's a full foundational skills training on the Nebraska Reads website that we did a couple of months ago. Abby can probably put the link in the chat for you. All right. So the next piece of the puzzle here, right, is building these meaning-based competencies to make sure that we're developing students' ability to make sense of what's being read. And that's really making sure that we're doing a lot of knowledge building and vocabulary building. And so I'm going to turn it over to Shireen, who's going to talk about this section for us.
Thank you so much. So while we are, Caitlin addressed more of the younger level. My experience is secondary and post-secondary in working with kids after they've graduated, they come back, and helping them through whatever their post-secondary pathway is. So she and I were battling a little bit about the slides because we're both really excited and passionate about this. So if you're looking at this, we are going to focus on that knowledge and vocabulary section, and we're going to see and dive into the meaning-based competencies. And the way we're going to do that, we'll see on the next slide, is the next section of, here we go. The next section on the observation tool is that section about high quality texts and answering the question, is this lesson focused on high quality texts? So for most teachers, especially in grades 3 through 12, most lessons will focus on reading comprehension. Once you identify as an observer whether a classroom has an acceptable culture of learning in which the kids are on task, you should quickly turn your attention to the text or absence of text in that classroom. We want to ask ourselves, are the students spending most of their time listening to, reading, writing, and/or speaking about texts? So I have a poll that I'm going to launch, and I am curious. Take a moment, please. Your best guess. Okay, we've got about 48%, 64%. I promise the answer is on the next slide. Okay. We're at 84% voted. So let's close it out and we can share the results. So we, as a community of educators who love English, landed on these. What we'll see in the next slide is what the lexile levels are on average in the research that was done by the very same people who designed lexile to begin with. So I'd love for you to take a moment and share in the chat anything that strikes you as surprising or interesting about what you see in this chart. Because we had 10% guess, we had 10% guess entry-level occupations, and that is where we see the highest lexile level. What strikes you? What's interesting about this? What's surprising about this? I'll give you all a moment to share in the chat. You're welcome to come off mute if you'd like to Did we surprise you, Christy?
Could you give us a definition of what the entry-level occupations would be?
Yeah, so I see it as, I think of the first job after college in some sort of a career, or the first job after high school if kids are moving straight through into a career path. So I think of things like employee manuals. I think of things like technical manuals. Maybe it's even trainings that are largely reading on a screen. So those are the kinds of things that I think would fall into that. Yeah, and if we're looking at college textbooks, so as I shared with you guys, I spent a lot of time with students after they had graduated from high school and went on to college. And, you know, as many of you might have experienced the same thing, when you're in college, you're trying to make a decision. Sometimes some kids are making a decision about whether to buy the book or not buy the book, right? Then you have, if you do buy the book and it is in front of you, often the complexity of the college textbooks, especially in nonfiction, where students maybe haven't been reading science, but they've been doing science and science has been explained to them a lot, are now reading actual science in a different way. And that level is leaps and bounds above what is often in high school textbooks. So the job of the ELA teacher is not limited to the ELA classroom, but the job of the science teacher does include ELA, right? So the next slide is fascinating. I'm curious if anybody's seen this before. So in one of my previous lives, I used to support ACT prep for all of the juniors. And in doing that, I did what we all maybe do or did, which is looking at the practice test that they took at the beginning. And I tried to really break down the data and figure out, okay, what are these different skills and what skills do I need to focus on? And how can I make sure that that score, because you see the 21 is the college ready benchmark. I think in Nebraska, it might be 20 to be admitted, but it's right around there, right? So I would focus and I'd be like, okay, maybe it's the main idea. Maybe I need to give them lots of practice with main idea. What this chart is saying is, you see how those lines are basically forming one line? The differences between those lines is statistical noise. So this is all virtually the same line. So if this is virtually the same line and kids are answering roughly the same amount, the same percent of questions correctly, no matter what is being asked of them, then we're spending our time laser focused on the wrong piece of data, right? Because here we're saying, wait a second, if this part is, if it's, you know, main idea, let's continue to use that example. If I spend all of my time teaching main idea and focusing on how to get the main idea, the reality is I'm not going to see a significant increase in the percent of questions that they get right, because we see that this is all basically one line that converges. So next, so what is the difference, right? What is the difference if it's not the types of questions, and if it's not the the skill that the questions are purportedly asking for, then what changes the ability for kids to be able to understand an ACT reading passage? And if for those of you who are primary, I'll just remind you, it's 4 passages. They fall in categories. There's the literature, there's social sciences, there's the humanities, and then there's like a hard science, natural science. So the difference, as we can see here, just take a moment and I'll like for 30 seconds, I won't talk. I want you to look and see if you can identify what changes the results. If you can throw in the chat, what do you see is the difference between this? Because we see that there are 3 distinct lines this time, whereas we didn't see 3 distinct lines last time. Look at the flat line leading up to the 21. If you remember, when I took the ACT, it was, there were 4 answer choices, which kind of meant that it makes sense that kids are getting about 30% right because they might be randomly guessing, right? And this was from the 4 answer choices. The difference in score is a result of the text complexity. Kids who can understand complex texts can answer any question about complex texts. Kids who can't understand complex text can have the strongest main idea muscle in their brain, but they cannot answer the main idea question about the complex text. So this sort of serves the purpose of, we as educators often focus, I mean, and it's a natural, it's funny, my son was asking me what I was doing this evening and I told him about this presentation and he's like, did you used to do that? And I was like, totally. I made this mistake for a good chunk of when I was teaching because I understood that the skills were, my understanding was that the skills were the thing we needed to focus on. And this is saying it's not an either or proposition. If you don't put the complex text in front of them, it does not matter how skilled they are at these different tasks. So when we're making this shift and we're saying, if we have this understanding that text complexity matters, text complexity is a game changer in terms of both instruction and outcomes for students, we need to consider sort of 3 parts of a triangle. One is the quantitative complexity. I distinctly remember being an 8th grade English teacher and pulling the science teacher's textbook and trying to do the math like myself because there were not any fandangled websites that had all the things. So I distinctly remember doing the quantitative, and it was number of words, syllables, in the number of sentences, that kind of calculation. The other part that we're going to look at today is the qualitative complexity rubric, because this will address some of the bigger and sort of meatier questions around selecting an appropriate text for a specific grade level. And finally, going back to what the ACT shared, we're going to focus on who the readers are and what the tasks are that they're being asked to do with the text that's in front of them. So we'll start with the first one, which is lexile. And just, if you could do the little reactions button and show of hands, who's done lexile levels, has labeled books probably. Like, if you go in reactions, there's like a thumbs up, you can thumbs up and we can see. We're generally pretty familiar with this. And so there's this opportunity that to make sure, so if you have high quality instructional material, this is like another plug, if you have high quality instructional materials, this part is done for you, and there are thoughtful considerations in the lexile level of the different materials. We have on the screen 2 different sites that you can go to check lexile levels. The first one, actually, you could just type in www.lexile.com and it skips the weird thing that happened on my computer when I opened it. And you can go and type in Catcher in the Rye, To Kill a Mockingbird, Romeo and Juliet, and it'll tell you what the lexile level is. The one on the bottom, this tool is for texts that aren't published as a full book. So you're going to see later in our session, you're going to see a classroom that is analyzing a speech, an inauguration speech. And this is where, as a teacher, I could copy the text, put it in here, and find out roughly what the lexile level is of that speech. Also good for movies and music and stuff like that, because kids will naturally bring up stuff. And there are definitely some, like Common, for example, is an artist whose lexile is really high. So when kids are singing those songs, you might know to recognize, like, wow, that's actually complex text. If we go to the next. Okay, so the chief, I can't remember what this acronym stands for, but the CCSO, and I will drop the link in the chat so you guys can find it. But if you go to the Nebraska Materials Matter site, you can follow this site. First of all, this is extraordinary. So I think, Marissa, if you were largely responsible for creating this, this was amazing. Good job. You'll see lots of resources here for you. You're in the ELA resources site, but if you go to the Council of Chief State School Officers, that very first one that says Navigating Text Complexity, what you'll see is a plethora of resources to look at and reference as you're doing this work. So I'm going to give you like a minute to go to that link, please, and go to the Council of Chief State School Officers and click on the Navigating Text Complexity, and just take a minute to kind of explore a little bit. Okay, so keep that site open on your computer because we will keep going back to it. But one of the things that they offer there is this very handy chart that lays out the different grade bands that would work for all of these different metrics. So we know that quantitative measurement of complexity is not enough. But we do know that it's a good starting place, and it's an especially good starting place for informational texts and nonfiction. It is a starting place for fiction, but we'll go a little bit more into the qualitative aspects of fiction that you and the teachers will want to consider. This is not relevant or particularly helpful at all for drama or poetry. Or for those very foundational K-1 texts that the kids are reading and decoding on their own. But for the read alouds, you do have this opportunity to identify the lexile level and have that, to what Caitlin said earlier, have the higher grade level bands be the focus of the read alouds for kids. So on the next slide, we are going to see, I taught To Kill a Mockingbird for years, and And I would say, I know this lexile level is 840, and quantitatively, this should be in 4th or 5th grade. But I also know the content of To Kill a Mockingbird. And I know the violence in To Kill a Mockingbird and the complexity with respect to the judicial system that's shared through this story. And so we did this in 8th grade. That doesn't mean that that's the only grade that it should be done in, but the qualitative measures of a text matter in so much as the teachers will be able to ensure that students are lifting from the text and the lessons around the text the key themes without spending so much time sort of getting kids up to speed in those, supports that we've discussed in the past. So you have hopefully that other screen still open. I wonder if if you pull that other screen back up, and that's the one where it's the Council for Chief State School Officers, and you're in the ELA resources, when you go to that screen, when you click on navigating text complexity, you're in there. If you go and you click on learn the ropes, what you'll see is a lot of really good stuff. And a lot of some of the resources that we've referenced so far in this session, but we will continue to reference going forward. When you've clicked on Learn the Ropes, you'll see that about halfway down, there's a how do I measure the complexity of a text. If you click on where it says qualitative rubrics, you'll see the ones that are used for, it says literature, and then the second page is informational texts. So thank you so much, Elizabeth, for dropping that in the chat. If you click here, it's the PDF. The first page again is literature, and the second page is informational texts. I would love to give some time for you all to be able to go through those documents. So we're going to send you out into breakout rooms of about 3 folks, well, we'll say 4 folks in each, and take some time, please, and go through. If you haven't yet opened that link, make sure you open the link before you head out into your breakout rooms. The next 2 minutes or so, if you as a group can take a look at what you notice in the qualitative rubrics. back in. Okay. All right, so as you guys are coming back in, if there was anything, I know that was a very short time, you have the access to all of this through that amazing website. So certainly, I think that there can be a little bit of anxiety around going through and doing this kind of analysis, because I think that folks tend to feel comfortable with what they know. So if they've taught this book at this grade for this long, it's a little bit trickier to sort of like dive into it. But the rubrics, I think, give a really good place for the discussion to happen around whether they are suitable for one grade over another. So we're on the next slide. We are going to focus on the questions and, oh, I'm sorry, we're going to practice this. Okay. So we have a text here, and I would recommend screenshotting this slide on your screen so that you can pull it up in the breakout rooms that you'll go back to. And here we have a text that is at the lexile level of 4th grade. I believe it is, I can't remember. Oh, it's 980L. So it's in that range. As a group, using the rubric that you just looked at for the informational text, read this together and determine whether you think this is worthy, this article is worthy of close reading and attention or not. And then identify one person who's going to be the person to share out the conversation that you and your group had. So we're going to put 5 minutes on the clock and send y'all back out. Please make sure that you have screenshot this reading, otherwise you're not going to be able to do the reading. So make sure that you get it on your screen, and we are going to reopen same rooms. We'll go back in and you're reading this and you're deciding if it is worthy of close reading and analysis using the rubric. Welcome back. So I would love to hear from one group member, and I don't know who volunteered as tribute. So if you could just throw your name in the chat. I would love to hear from one group member, and I want to focus on the purpose strand of the rubric, because I think that sort of lends itself to the general assessment of this. Shelley, if you could come off mute and share what your group decided where this fit in terms of purpose.
Well, and I don't have the rubric in front of me, and I haven't the whole time, but we talked about this, and if it's at the 980 lexile, that's like 6th grade, but we did not find that it was very high on the complexity scale. Mickey said it's pretty straightforward. It's information, sentences are pretty basic, but is it inappropriate for that 6th grade then? Well, then we talked about how it would be important to put a task with this that is rigorous. that would have them think more deeply, perhaps, and carry that cognitive load. So you could get into, about uniforms being an expression of identity, but they're also an expression of conformity. And how do those two concepts come into conflict? So you dig a little deeper underneath this, kind of reading between and around, and what was the author trying to get you to think in this? What was the purpose? There are lots of different ways you could do that, but we did not find that it was particularly challenging, but you could ramp that up with the task.
Yes, so we would agree. This is not a particularly robust, complex text. It's very straightforward. It's factual in its simplicity, almost like the statements are even just very short, and it doesn't really sort of hit the mark as a text to use. Though your thoughts around the task, the thinking around the task does, bring it up, but there's no sense in hiding, just like from the ACT results, like there's no sense in not bringing in a more complex text in order to do just such a task that you guys came up with. So
sometimes when you see something like this, I get to the end of it and it's like, well, so what? It's
exactly.
Is this, I did not find the writing to be particularly compelling.
Yeah.
That would lead students to ask questions. So that was kind of my take on it.
Yep. And I think your so what question speaks directly to the strand on the rubric. That's the purpose strand. It appears to be informative, but not particularly purposeful in any kind of way. I really like that. Yeah. So thank you for that and for volunteering as tribute, Shelley. So on the next slide, we're going to shift our attention. So we did some digging into, are the texts complex enough? And we had some very clear rubrics and measures to consider. Now we're looking at the actual quality of the tasks. So in the opportunity myth that Caitlin talked about, we talked about how these sometimes, too often, the tasks themselves aren't particularly engaging, worthwhile, or complex. And so we'll take a moment, we'll go through this together. Does this lesson employ questions and tasks, both oral and written, which integrate the standards and build students' comprehension of the text and its meanings? So then we'd look at these different bullets. Does the teacher integrate grade level reading, writing, speaking, and listening, and or language standards in service of deep understanding of the texts and or the topics under consideration? Do they address specific texts at hand by attending to its particular structure, concepts, ideas, events, or details? And do the teachers, and this one is one that's a sticking point for a lot, do they require students to use details from the text to demonstrate understanding and or support their ideas about the text? So this is not necessarily the, in the essay, does it quote? It is that, but it is also in the discussion, in the answers in the classroom, are the students pointing and reading from the text to support their argument? The attending to words, phrases, and sentences that within the text that matter the most to build students' vocabulary and deepen their understanding. And finally, is it sequenced to deepen students' understanding of the text, the author's craft, and or the topic under consideration? So we're going to look a little bit more at this. I'm going to take the volunteers from the previous group and ask Allison if you will kindly, you are the bomb, according to someone's iPhone. If you could come off mute, and if you could please read the title of this slide and the first quote, and then if Mickey, if you could take the second quote.
Absolutely. So a literacy program driven by discrete skills, will not lead to the student literacy outcomes we are working toward. And the first quote, the mistaken idea that reading is a skill, learn to crack the code, practice comprehension strategies, and you can read anything, may be the single biggest factor holding back reading achievement in the country.
And my quote is from our friends Timothy Shanahan, Doug Fisher, and Nancy Fry. Gone are the days when text was judged as difficult solely on the basis of sentence length and syllable count. We now know that many factors affect text complexity. With this increased understanding, teachers do not have to rely on intuition to figure out which books their students can handle. Instead, teachers can select texts worthy of instruction and align their instructional efforts to ensure that all their students read complex, interesting, and important texts.
And yes, very nice. You're getting a shout out. In the
Oh,
chat.
thanks, Abby.
This speaks to my English teacher self 10 years ago. And I was pointed in the direction of a book room and told, like, those are the books you're reading. That may or may not be the same in some of your districts and areas. But the other component of this is it's not a secret sauce anymore. There's very clear there's a clear framework to really dive into whether this is the right text and the right task to do with that text. So thank you both. On the next slide, we are just very quickly going to look at how this is from the Common Core. And, I fully recognize that that Nebraska is not a Common Core state, but I wanted to make sure that we included this just for the text that's vertical, that's going up in terms of grade level. We're looking for two things. We are simultaneously increasing the ability for students to use text evidence. And I know in Nebraska, you guys have done a lot of work around text-dependent answers. So that's really great. And that becomes more and more pronounced the older students get, and increasing the range and complexity of the texts and the tasks. So those two ideas, as they're going along in concert, will support students being able to mitigate sort of some of the unfinished learning that's been going on since the beginning of COVID. So focusing on this meaning represents a significant change from literacy instruction of the past decade. We're not, going to the standards and randomly selecting standards and drilling them into children. And I was guilty of what's on the left, like fully transparent. And if you zoom in a little bit on this, what you see is the students are being asked to basically fill in the blank with words from the quote, the reading, and then just put metaphor, simile off to the side. And that being enough to sort of say, check, we know what a metaphor or simile is, and check, we read this to do that. If you look on the right-hand side, what you see is, and I'll just do part A, the author uses the word crept in paragraph 8 instead of a word like walked or marched. As used in the story, what does the use of the word crept suggest about Skidmore? And I think to myself, like, this is pushing vocabulary. You see author's craft, choice that authors take. You think about what is the suggestion, what's the reason for choosing crept instead of walked or marched, right? So just the task itself, even though it's still multiple choice, is digging so much further within the text than the left-hand side, right? If we see on the next slide, we are talking about student ownership. And this is absolutely 100% something that, you know, one of the best principals I had once said, I bet you leave school really tired because you are doing all of the thinking in class. I was like, oh my gosh. And it was excellent and incredibly sharp feedback, because it resonated with me. It was true. And I was robbing the students of the opportunity to do the mental lifting, right? So we're looking for whether students are responsible for their thinking. Are they displaying persistence, even when it's hard? Are they being precise instead of, you know, yeah, that was pretty smart, or that was pretty funny, or that was pretty cool, which, you know, we're all guilty of. Are they sharing their developing thinking? So like, are you hearing the gears turning in class and explaining their thinking, not necessarily explaining like why their answer is right, but the thinking behind the answer? And you'll see an example of this shortly. And then that they build on each other's responses, so that it's volleyball instead of tennis with the teacher, right? On the next slide, we'll see this, especially in virtual land, but I know you guys are back in the building. If you've been an English teacher, you know the struggle with kids speaking up in class. And so students can't be responsible for the thinking without both the thinking and the participation. And that risk-taking and that practice with being precise in answering questions, and that comfort with sharing thinking over answers is what over time will build their confidence. And we talk about like the SEL component of all of this, will build their confidence in order to attack complex texts in a way that doesn't feel like they are being attacked by the texts. So we're gonna look, we're gonna go one more forward. We're gonna look at two classes. We'll look at about 5 minutes of the first one, chat it up, and then we'll look at about 5-ish minutes, 8 minutes of the second one. When you're looking at the class, I would love for you to have the literacy tool, the walkthrough tool in front of you, at least sort of up on your screen in the background, and note what you see and see how far you get. This is a senior English class. All right, take it away. Because you're on, Elizabeth, we can't hear you because you're on mute. So you're gonna have to unmute.
Sorry, there you go. Back to the start.
No problem.
Good morning, everyone. As usual on Wednesday, we're going to start with our archetypal theory. Today's archetypal character is the Fool. Our last two characters have been a little bit challenging. Remember that recently we took a look at the alter ego, which is fairly difficult. And we took a look at the Byronic hero, which is quite difficult, that rough around the edges kind of hero, very different than the standard hero. This is a figure that I think is a lot more recognizable. So as usual, take a moment to read over the description and turn to your neighbors and do some informal brainstorming about figures you think fit this model, both from literature and from pop culture.
Yeah. Even though we like the last week, don't consider Jack Sparrow.
He's a little too intelligent, I think, maybe. He's more of a Byronic hero. This one needs to be a little goofy.
Like
Yeah. Oh yes, Forrest Gump is perfect. That's a perfect example. I never come back from that. Yeah.
like Jafar's parrot. Yeah.
The only thing about his parrot is that he's a little too clever. Yeah, he's more of a sidekick. You want a character that generates a little bit more kind of silly comic relief. Maybe so. Yeah.
And the fool, like the hero or the villain's pacifier.
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes this character merges with the sidekick. Yeah, that happens quite often, actually. Anything good?
I don't know if it's that way.
Maybe so. The thing about Moby Dick, though, is I don't know if there are really any uproariously funny, moments in that one. It's a little bit of a serious book.
You got that one? Peter Pettigrew?
I say the twins.
Oh,
Yeah.
Is the fool like also like a prankster? Does that have to be
Sometimes.
does that have to be like a dumb character? Does it feel like
It's like mostly the fool is a little bit substandard intelligence, but then he'll have off these moments of crazy epiphany, which is where the irony comes in. We perceive the fool to be lowly in stature and lowly in intelligence, but then he'll come out with some kind of gem. Yeah.
would Jim from Huck Finn be one?
I think the
'Cause
Duke
he's like
and the Dauphin are probably
Okay.
the goofballs there. Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. Jim is a Byronic hero / hero's best friend.
Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. Anything good?
Patrick.
Patrick's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good one. Now that everyone has had a chance to do some brainstorming and speak with neighbors, as usual, we're going to discuss these characteristics together and come up with some examples from literature and pop culture. So the fool. As I mentioned, this is a very common character as well. And what you look for here is you look for the fool to be an ironic form of comic relief. So what is comic relief? Someone give us an understanding of comic relief. Yes.
Like if it's a serious moment, it's that one person who just makes it like eases the mood.
Absolutely. I like the way you said that, eases the mood. That's what you look for in comic relief. Therefore, we'll often find fools in what kinds of works of literature then, class? Drama or tragedy. Yep. You look for this figure to kind of shake things up, because if the mood gets too serious, it's hard for the audience to maintain focus. And we have a little bit of irony here. And here's essentially the irony that goes on. Although the fool is ridiculous, and although the fool may not have the highest social standing or may not be the most intellectually gifted, the fool will sometimes come out with these little gems of wisdom. So the irony here is that although lowly, the fool is usually momentarily wise. The fool will have these little quick, wise moments, and we're going to talk about why. So again, his appearance or his station in life, his socioeconomic status, he may not be noble, okay? Maybe kind of lowly or ridiculous or silly, but this often reminds us of how arbitrary class snobbery can be. What is arbitrary? Random, unfair, not based on fact. Because a lot of times when people in certain social classes, the higher ones, when they consider themselves better than everyone else, that class snobbery is shattered by the fool, because here's the fool in the lower class or who gets less respect, and he'll see something about the upper class that really exposes their ridiculousness or their folly. So he's a commentator. He comments upon the powerful people, the wealthy people in society, and he gets away with it. How can the fool get away with making these kinds of...
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. So I am going to put y'all back in your breakout rooms with your tool. We want to make sure the classroom culture is in place. And then to the next task of focusing on high quality texts. And again, volunteer someone different, please, as tribute. I'm going to send you all into your rooms. Jen, did you volunteer as tribute? Is that why you came on video?
Hey, Jen, me?
Yes.
Oh, I was just on video from our breakout, but I don't mind. That's fine.
Okay. Yeah. So what did you think? We're all back now.
Well, we started with culture of learning, and we felt like that was a yes, or at least a mostly yes. That seems strong. In terms of high quality texts, I guess we would have to say either NA or not yet, just because we didn't see specific text. And do you want me to keep going, or do you want to pass the baton?
Yeah, sure. Is there anything in particular with, well, let's start with culture of learning. Is there anything in particular that you saw that you were like, that is evidence of like a good relationships or comfort or participation, whatever it was?
Well, Diane, who was my partner in the breakout room, really pointed out that students seemed engaged in the work of the lesson. They seemed on target with their responses and with the partner conversations, at least from what we saw. So that'd be one example.
Mm-hmm. Great. Abby, would you mind sharing what your group determined in terms of the text complexity or the presence of a high quality text?
Yeah, we actually sort of got, I don't want to say got stuck on, but we're thinking about the teacher credibility. The teacher had such deep content knowledge about these high quality texts. And I was sharing with the group that it got me thinking about John Hattie's meta-analysis of different aspects of, student achievement. And it reminded me that teacher credibility has a huge effect size, an even higher effect size than I would have ever imagined. So when teachers know their content knowledge, I think it was Rita in my group said, it was interesting how she was able to let go of control. And I think that's partly because of the teacher credibility. She knows her stuff.
So I think that there is definitely, you do sense that even with the pop culture references, right? Like she was like, oh, not Jafar. Oh, not the twins, not Peter Pettigrew, right? And you're like, okay, cool. You've read Harry Potter. We're down, right? She definitely did exude both the confidence and had the credibility. In this example, and it continues, it's a very long video, but she is the expert. But so much so that when she goes around, she's the one who says, yes, no, yes, no. And it doesn't get to a place where the kids say, yes, no, yes, no. And so that's
I wanted her to go. Yeah, I wanted her to go to that because she did let go of control in terms of letting the students talk. But I was like, oh, you just answered it for them. This
Correct.
Would be a great opportunity to ask the question. What's the question you would ask next? So there's, so I'm not referring back to the rubric, but I know it's in there somewhere.
No, yeah, and that's part of it, right? The task itself was to identify people who fall in this role, right? And that seems like a pretty worthwhile task because they are pulling from a lot of different things. But if she's the one who decides yes or no and says why, then they aren't the ones who are explaining. Instead of, they're just identifying, they're not explaining, and they're kind of like randomly guessing. Like, you get the sense that some of them are like, okay, funny characters, go, and they just name all of them. But this is a very nuanced type of character. So thank you so much for sharing.
And it might come out in the student ownership part.
Yes. Yo, share, please.
I was just thinking that's probably where that part of the lesson would come out, and she perhaps might do some work to shift the student ownership because she was owning a lot of it.
Exactly, and it lived with her where I wondered if kids were asked to write about one of the bionic heroes, not bionic, but would they have been able to both identify and explain why it's this character and not so-and-so or so-and-so? And that's another piece where it doesn't. And we stopped it a little earlier, but the vast majority of this. And there are no complex texts. They are not there. So we see them referencing some things that they clearly did read. A little later in the video, they talk about, I think it's Othello in this one, like that. So they reference it, but no student is sitting with a text where they are looking at or spending the majority of their time looking at, reading, writing, speaking, or thinking about text. Movies, characters, that is more present than a text itself. So we're gonna watch the next video and you're going to see that this shifts. This is a 10th grade class. This is a class that's focusing on Obama's inauguration speech.
Through Obama's 2009 inaugural address, what messages are communicated to the people of America?
I was asking the students to analyze the cumulative effect of President Obama's 2009 inaugural address and analyze the form and the content. By form, I mean the literary and rhetorical devices that were used.
Not only did he want to address what he wanted to fix, he also showed in lines 52 and 57, well, through 52 and 57, all of the goals that he wanted to complete during his term.
And then like on words that he uses a lot of, he used the word we a lot, speaking as if we were all together and gonna work together to help it. Like in all lines, like even in line 28, he says we, 59. I'm just pointing out random ones, but it's effective.
I engage the students in a lot of public speaking activities that prepare them to be comfortable.
On this day, repeated both times, which is an example of anaphora, because really it emphasizes what the point he's trying to get across.
I introduce to them how do you engage in a conversation with your peers, not interrupting each other and being respectful of others' opinions, respectfully disagreeing.
Obama, he alludes to historical events, like on lines 146 to 149. He's sort of emphasizing the hope and strength in times of difficulty. And yeah, he also references presidents and quotes presidents to make himself appear more convincing to his listeners.
Thematically, the speech fits into a general essential question for the year. How does the past inform our current decisions and our actions?
He alluded to the Battle of Valley Forge during the Revolutionary War. And this was a time of violence and despair. Thousands of people were dying. There was almost no possibility that they were going to succeed in this war. And Washington's words of hope are basically what got them through it. And Obama is saying if they could overcome a struggle like this, we can overcome this economic struggle. So the winter of hardship that he's talking about is symbolizing the economic crisis that they were facing at the time, I think.
The way that I have my Socratic seminar structured,
Uh-oh, you're muted again, Elizabeth.
elements and speaking with each other and trying to uncover and discover the purpose of the text that we're discussing, rather than my directly instructing them on what I think the meaning of the text is.
A major rhetorical device that Obama makes use of is the tricolon. So he does it a number of times. Like, for example, in line 17, homes have been lost, jobs shed, businesses shuttered. That's a tricolon.
I found another example of a tricolon, line 23. He speaks about the challenges that America is facing, saying that they are real, they are serious, and they are many.
I incorporated text-based answers during the discussion. Students were referencing particular lines in order to provide answers to their questions or to answer each other's questions. And so you saw a direct reference to text. When thinking about the preparation for high-performing students, for this group of students in particular, I picked a speech that forced them to closely read rhetoric and to pick out and pick apart the use of rhetorical devices. And so this really forces them to do some high level critical thinking on their own without my guidance as their teacher.
There are a lot of rhetorical devices and literary devices found in this speech, like an amazing amount. But not only do you see them in this speech, but you could also connect it to Langston Hughes' poem, Let America Be America Again. And I think they contrast greatly, like they're basically opposite people. And ironically, they're both talking about the same people. They're talking about the hardworking people. The difference is Obama shaped his words with optimism while Langston spoke negatively about them. Obama's saying that we need to renew America's dream. So he's saying that we had the dream, but we just need to get it back. And Langston's saying we need to redeem the dream. He thinks that we never had the dream, but we still need to reach it.
I agree with Alex partially in that Hughes is negative, but towards the end, he becomes more like Obama, his tone. Like in the beginning, his tone is pessimistic and angry about America. He really didn't like how it didn't fulfill its American dream. But in the last stanza, he says, you know, there's enough hope that we can have the hope for America to be better again.
So are you saying that Obama's trying to rekindle the spirits of the American people so we can have another great America?
Yes, I think that is what he's saying. He stresses hope a lot in his poem. He's saying with hope you can move forward. With hope you can overcome any struggle that you face. So yes, I think that.
How do you think he's trying to say, like, is American people supposed to like achieve this dream?
Obama, I think he's saying that the Americans need to work in unison. And that's why he uses unifying words like we, our, us, right? He puts himself on their level so they can all work together. Langston Hughes, he also has the same thing. He wants everybody to work together.
Okay, in the spirit of time is almost up and I'm so sad. What are just immediate thoughts? If you guys could just throw in the chat, come off mute. What do you see in terms of culture of learning? I think we can sort of see that there is a really strong culture of learning. The second component, that high quality text. Are we looking at high quality text? Just come off mute, that's fine.
Yes, I think we are looking at some rich text, more so in connection with the task, right? They were breaking down language, they were breaking down devices, rhetorical devices, and possibly some rhetorical appeals there. And the only problem I have or concern I have is always with the Socratic seminar. I would love to know what those who were not speaking, right, were doing to signal their level of engagement. As in the first class, when you turn and talk to your neighbor, there's that 100% engagement, as opposed to us seeing the same kids kind of like talk and question each other back and forth. But it was phenomenal.
I thought it was also, it seemed to me like the student who was asking the questions was that student's job. You know, it was very clear, like that was the only time that student contributed. But the question built off of the other, the discussion. So, you know, that was really interesting to me. Yes, I hear you with the 100%. Other, in terms of the task, like we talked about, the task is rich. Was there anything else that they were doing that maybe you didn't see in the first video?
I think because the nature of them having, and sorry for speaking again, the nature of them having the text in front of them, there was this strong use of the text, right? They were valuing the evidence, using the evidence to back up every assertion that they had, right? There was this reference to the lines within the text. It was just really powerful and refreshing to watch.
Yeah, and I think there was also referencing Langston Hughes's poem. She read the words. She wasn't sort of saying, "Oh yeah, he kind of said," you know. She clearly looked down at her notes and she like read the words, and so that absolutely right. And you see the teacher in this is in the back taking notes, not in the front or while circulating, like doing the mental heavy lifting, which is really great. Okay, I know we're out of time. My hope is that you have a clear vision of excellent ELA instruction at your school. The tool is available for you whenever you need. If asked, would your teachers at any given campus or district, would they articulate the same vision? And that's what this tool offers. And do you put grade level content first and foremost? Yes, we can share the videos. We'll put the PowerPoint up on the Launch Nebraska website that Corey linked earlier. And in the PowerPoint, you're able to click through and the videos are embedded in there. So have the students focused on standards aligned tasks, and are the kids, the student ownership, are they the ones doing the work and the thinking? Or is the teacher leaving exhausted every day? If you answered no to any of these questions, then it's time to go back and revisit the vision of excellent ELA instruction. So this tool is for you. It is one of many tools. If you go to the tntp.org website and you look under Student Toolkit, what you'll see is we have these walkthrough tools for literacy, for math, which you'll do on Monday, and even for science. We don't have social studies because social studies and history is just nonfiction reading. So we invite you, encourage you, and ask that you use the literacy one for social studies. Thank you, Abby. Think of how you might revise your vision of literacy instruction to better align with some of the things that we've discussed today in terms of qualitative, quantitative, and high quality tasks and texts. And then also how you communicate that out with teachers and leaders in your district. This is the end where I'm here, like I'm happy to answer questions, but officially, thank you so much for joining again. I love this stuff, so I can talk about it all day. Thank you, Kristen, I appreciate it. Definitely make use of the slide deck, make use of our website. We are so happy to just be working with y'all. Thank you so much. You got it. It will be on the website soon. Thanks, Abby. Thank you so much for your participation, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. May the odds